Hello and welcome to yet another rehearsal space somewhere in London. I'm sure if you've ever practiced any instrument in London that you probably can deduce where we are today. So yes, this is actually the studio where we recorded the drums for our single Chords, which is what we're going to be talking through today. We're going to be talking about the drums, the cymbals, the heads, all the drum nerdy stuff that I used on that track, because it's a bit of a weird setup on that song. Let's have a look. First, I thought I'd show you the cymbals on this recording because they are as unconventional as the rest. This is actually probably the most unconventional part of this setup. As you can probably already sort of tell, that's not just the angle. These hi-hats in front of me are incredibly large, 20 inches in fact. So, bollocks, I shouldn't have done that, should I? So, as I was saying, 20-inch hi-hats here. On the top we have an Istanbul Agop jazz ride of the Turk variety, which means it's completely unlathed, both on the top and underneath. It's a really super dry cymbal. Normally I use this on my ride. On my ride I use this as my ride. If you've ever listened to any of our other songs, this will be the ride most likely that I'm using. But for this track, I had quite a specific idea in mind for how I wanted this to sound, and I thought I'd give this a go. Underneath, let me take this off, we have another Istanbul cymbal, of course, because they are the best. An Istanbul got ion crash, so this is one with loads of holes. Just to get a bit more trashiness from this cymbal. It also lets a bit of air out, because when you've got these massive cymbals like this, using it as a hi-hat, you can get a lot of air trapped inside, which sometimes means they don't close properly. So that is the hi-hats on this song. Nice and big, nice and crispy, nice and dry. I'll tell you at the end why I went for such an interesting choice. Next, let's move on to this crash cymbal here. This, my friends, is another Istanbul, again, of course, because they're beautiful and lovely and yummy. This is an Istanbul Exist Dry Dark. This is, again, 20 inches, because I love 20-inch cymbals. They just give me the most sort of, the most dynamic range. I think I can use them as ride cymbals, I can use them as crashes. This crash is really nice. It also rides really nice, because it's super thin, as you can see. There, you can like completely bend it in half, and it doesn't really mind. For the last crash slash ride, this is a Dream Bliss 22 paper thin crash ride cymbal. I think it's just called a cymbal, because it literally can do whatever you want. This too is very, very thin, as you can see by the lovely Pringle shape. Other crisps are available. That's a really lovely thin sort of washy cymbal. It's got a really nice white sort of white noise sort of timbre to it, which means it cuts through really nicely on the track. And for such a big sort of spacious song, it works really nicely. So that's why I used that. I realised I forgot a cymbal. The stack that I use on this song. This is an old Istanbul trash hit, I think they're called, a 12-inch one on the bottom. It's all warped and nice, sounds really trashy on its own. So that's on the bottom. On the top I have I think this is a Sabian AAX that I stole from my dad. It has a nice big hefty chonk out of it. And that just sits on the top. And you get the sort of crispy, bacony, sort of splashy, watery, yummy, you know, sort of. I hit that and I realised you probably won't be able to use that in the video, because it can be really loud. But never mind, you get the idea. That is the stack, there we go. So, for heads, this is actually pretty straightforward on this, because I don't have many drums. I've only got a snare drum and a floor tom. On the snare we have an Evans hydraulic head. It's the black hazy one, so it's just a little bit drier again than the normal shiny hydraulic heads that you've probably seen like drummers like Spot using. So yeah, that's just that. It's the only head that I really found to give the sort of right sort of sound that I wanted from this drum. you know, super low, super fat, and super dry as well. No ring to it at all. So that's the head on that. And on the bottom of that drum, it's just your standard hazy 300, a really super thin, normal box standard snare head that most people use, just to give nice snare response. All that really. So yeah. Then on the floor tom, we have another Evans hydraulic head. This was to give me the sort of lowest, fuddiest tone from this tom. It's only a 14-inch drum, as I already said. So it's not inherently the lowest drum in the world, but I wanted to get it just that little bit lower, that little bit thuddier. So I went for an Evans hydraulic on the top. Again, that's one of the hazy ones, so a little bit dry, a little less ringy, and a little less attack on that. It's a red one, if you want to know. And on the bottom of the floor tom, I have a head which I think has been marketed more towards the heavy metal, rock, potentially maybe gospel side of the drumming world, and that's black chrome, which is actually a 2-ply head. Not a lot of people put 2-ply heads on the bottom of their toms, but I wanted this floor tom to sound probably closer in timbre to a bass drum rather than a floor tom, so I went for both sides, really thick heads. It just gives me that sort of controlled, concise, short, thuddy sound on the floor tom. Nice and low. With those heads, it means I can tune it all the way down, basically to the very bottom of the drums, the shell's capability. With those heads, it doesn't leave any ringing, it doesn't leave any nasty overtones. It's just the sort of the sound you want. Nice, thuddy, low. So that's that. Bass drum head. That is just a what is it? An EMAD 2, one of the Evan heads with the plastic ring and the foam inserts, the one that basically everyone uses. It's just a nice sounding head. I don't really mess about with my bass drum head. It sounds nice, I leave it as it is. Something else I should probably mention when it comes to the heads on these drums is the dampening I've used. The floor tom, there we go, has no dampening at all, it's just a floor tom. That's because it has such thick heads on it, it doesn't need it. But the snare I found still had a couple overtones, especially when you tune it up to get the sort of tommier sound from it, because I use it here normally, next to my tom, so here, as a tom and a snare, like Sput, Larnell, those sort of guys. I had to sort of find an interesting dampening method. I didn't like the sound of moon gel on this drum. It was dampening it too much, but I didn't like it wide open. So what I did is I stuck a tiny little bit of like sticky gel tape there, a bit like moon gel but stickier. And then I stuck these two little red felt patches to it. These sound a bit like a gate. So what they do is you hit the drum, they bounce up in the air, giving you a little bit of sustain, and then they fall down, giving you like a really tight gate, and that is what I found to be the best dampening for a tom slash snare this low, because it gives you a little bit of sustain, so you still get the snarey, nice rattliness of it, but then it dampens it down, so you don't get too many overtones carrying on as you're grooving. So yes, give that a try if you're at a loose end. At a loss with how to dampen your big fat snare. It's on me. So, the actual drums. What drums do I use? I actually think like drums themselves aren't the most important thing. You don't need to spend loads and loads of money on drums. You can get a really decent sound out of a super cheap kit with nice heads. So if you have, you know, a couple £100 laying about, you want to invest it in some drum gear, invest in some decent-ish cymbals like these Istanbul Exist ones. You can pick them up super cheap, brand new. Like this cymbal's only £180 brand new. Like that's a great deal. Get some cymbals like that and get some decent heads, and don't worry too much about the drums, because you can get a decent sound if you know how to tune a drum. But saying that, these drums, so the kick and the tom, they are from the same shell pack. That's a Pearl Birch Masters kit. I really like the sound of Birch. It sort of sounds pre-cued almost. You know, the bass drum sounds like it's dipped in the mid, you know, it's got a nice accentuation on the low end. So when Sam comes to mix this kit, it's super easy, there's not loads of dipping out horrible frequencies, because there aren't really any there. They've done a really nice job with this kit. It sounds really nice. The floor toms, yeah, the same, just Birch Pearl Masters floor tom. 14-inch, and the bass drum's 20-inch as well. I don't know what depth they are, to be entirely honest. The snare is quite an interesting one. The snare is an old Premier snare. This is from the 60s, and it's a marching snare. So this is one of the snares you'd see, you know, I don't know, the Queen's Guards or a marching band walking around with. So it's got two snares. It's got one on the bottom head, like a normal snare, and then it has one on the top head as well that sort of pushes up from the inside. So you can get some really wacky sounds out of it. You might not be able to hear this over the mic, but we'll give it a go. That's just the bottom snare, and then if you turn this top snare on, you get a sort of even snarier, weirder sound. A bit weird to play with. To be entirely honest with you, don't really use the top snare. I don't actually think I've ever used the top snare in a gig. I might have used it once or twice to record. But yeah, so that is the snare. It's the only deep, fat snare that I ever found that I liked the sound of. I tried a load, and this is the one I settled on. So yeah, it's a cool bit of kit. It's a nice little drum. So that's the drums. So, last but not least, I want to quickly just discuss why I made the choices that I did and why I used the gear that I did to record the drums for our track chords. So, I sort of knew from the get-go, from the start of this song, you know, when we had the foundations of this song, when we had the chord progression, when we had those sort of bits down, I knew what sort of drums I wanted. The guitar was very, I suppose you could describe it sort of airy, very big sounding. These were big chords, you know, there's lots of harmony in there, some really complex, weird chords. And I wanted the drums to sound as big as these chords. So I didn't want to go for, you know, a really tight, funky, hip-hoppy sound, because I just don't think that would have been right for the track. Instead, I thought, let's go for the biggest, widest sound I can. So my first approach was, drum-wise, let's get everything as low as we can, and as big sounding as we can, you know. I wanted it to sound big and fat. That was basically my main goal for the drum sound. And then the cymbal choices sort of came from that. You know, I didn't want a normal hi-hat sound, because my hi-hats are quite dry, they're quite crisp. I wanted something with a bit more sustain, a bit more crunch, and again, a bit more low end, a bit more width to the sound. So that's why I chose these ridiculous 20-inch hi-hats with the holes in the bottom to give me a nice sort of dirty, crunchy, big, wide sound. Again, with the cymbals, I just went for the biggest, thinnest cymbals that I had to get the lowest pitch and to get the most sustain. Fat cymbals, nice and thin, gives you that sort of low end, the complexity that I wanted. And then drum-wise, yeah, tune everything down, get a nice fat snare, and yeah, and just hit it, groove with it. Let's see what we can do. So yeah, this was the setup I tried. It ended up working out really nicely first time, and that's what we went with. So this is what you'll hear on our new track, Chords. You can check it out now on everywhere, wherever you want to check it out. Go check it out if you want to hear what this sounds like in the context of the song. Cheers, guys.